Hello everyone and welcome back to another Babbling Irons video. Myself and Mike today. The injury crisis is back. It didn't take long to come back, but now it's here. Jarrod Bowen potentially out for a longer period than we first thought. Again, having scans and stuff at the moment. Paqueta's injury's back. Kudus is away on international break, which means we're kind of left with the man that was signed almost a year ago now, Danny Ings. And in the press today, it's come out that he's probably going to be staying now after links to the likes of Wolves because of that reason. Mike, it's been a year of Danny Ings. He scored about 3 or 4 goals in that time, maybe, 3 goals. There we go. 2 were against Forest near the beginning of his career. I think 1 in Europa Conference League. But other than that, it's just not worked out for him.
Ghent away, wasn't it? The 1-1 draw against Ghent. That's the only other time he scored. Yeah. Let's be honest. It's been an utter disaster of a transfer, hasn't it? Supposedly our highest earner on 125 grand a week, which is insane. It is the absolute epitome of a panic buy, a deal done by David Sullivan because it was a player that David Moyes once wanted. We needed a striker. Didn't want to put the money up for Moffey. Moffey wasn't necessarily too interested, but we also didn't really pursue or push that. And they panicked and bought Danny Ings because it was a proven player in the Premier League.
Yeah.
And when you consider that it's meant to be a player that Moyes wanted, it's a player that we've completely misused, mismanaged, utilised it incorrectly. However, there's an element of that that's partially on the player as well. And it has been awful. And Danny Ings has looked terrible. Again, not all on him, partly on West Ham, but it has been an utter disaster of a deal. And I think Sloth was putting up saying it's the worst deal he's seen West Ham do in the Premier League era. I think someone counted it with Kieran. I think someone counted it with Kieran Dyer. I think that's probably right. Kieran Dyer probably was the worst deal we've ever done. But this becomes a very, very close second, considering the money spent and the very little return we've got and how quickly we're looking to get him out of the club.
Yeah, no, 100%. And now we find ourselves kind of in a similar situation to last January where we had some targets lined up. We probably want to do more business in the summer. It's been kind of rumored that we're having this 1 in, 1 out policy at the moment because the funds aren't really there. And, you know, how long we've been waiting for a striker to kind of come into the mold of what David Moyes wants. You know, Scamacca didn't work out. Haller didn't work out. He's put Antonio there, which was a temporary solution to a long-term, fix of what you want as a striker. He's now, too old, too injury prone, and just doesn't do the role well enough. He brought in Danny Ings because we couldn't get Moffey, like you mentioned. And it's just been a disaster. And we're now kind of 8 days into January. We've still got a little bit of time to act on this. We can be quite proactive in how we go about the transfer window, but I just know what's going to happen. It's going to dwindle on. We're going to wait to assess some of these injuries. We're going to maybe try out Danny Ings in a game. We've got Sheffield United coming up, so we'll probably give him a test run there if we need to. And then, Mubama as well, probably going to hang around. And then you've got the likes of Cornet who can probably play there. But do you see it being a panic buy, this transfer? Is that what kind of concerns you, that the lack of strategy? Because look, we didn't get Moffey last year. He was a #1 target. Should there have been a plan? Like, we should already really be planning for the summer. Is there any way we could maybe try and bring that forwards into January for some of these players, especially at striker?
Yeah, I think it was just I'm going to say as I think it was a joke of a situation last season. Mark Noble was, if we go by what we were told, was very clear in his kind of encouragement that we go for Moffey, and it was dithered. We pondered on it. We kind of procrastinated to a point where obviously the players were like, well, no, I'd rather stay in France actually. And there's a team that really want me. And we shot ourselves in the foot, and we do this constantly. We've seen this a lot with Moyes, in that he's some would say he's diligent. I would say he was indecisive. I think that was a case of both.
Yeah.
And we have often seen it with players where they haven't been wanted, and then say it's a transfer window later. Guirassy apparently is one of the players that was presented previously, was rejected.
Apparently he's injured now as well.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And this is the point we see players that are presented to the club, they're rejected, and then 6 months to a year later, we then want them. And it's just like, well, this is the problem, is that we don't seem to be decisive. And yeah, Ings was an absolute panic. However, I do feel that there isn't a panic situation in this window because there's been quite a long line of strikers. We looked at like Etikike, like Adams. Obviously, we've looked at Garassi, who's unfortunately picked up an injury. I do think we will still have that conversation, but we want to know the severity of his injury.
Yeah.
And then once we know that severity, I think we'll either go ahead with it or we won't. And the other thing is he's at the AFCON anyway. So what? We're looking at end of January, beginning of February anyway, before he kind of gets back. So
I mean, yeah, it's tough because we also haven't even mentioned Antonio, who's picked up another injury on top of the injury he's coming back from, which is probably the most Antonio and West Ham thing that could happen. He's going to be out for another 4 to 6 weeks. So again,
he slipped and he fell. It's like he's just like they're describing someone's gran. Oh, she's had a fall. She's all right, but she's had a fall, so she's going to take a bit of time to get herself back on her feet. It feels a bit like that. It's the only way I can look at it because it's at that point where you just have to laugh and find the funny in it, and it's not funny. It really isn't funny, but you just have to find the funny in it. And it just, the moment it was said and the way it was said, it just made me think like it sounds like someone's gran has had a fall, and it's like, oh, she's all right, but she's had a bit of a fall. We need to look after her.
Yeah, honestly. Well, for me, it's now got to a point where we're sat 6th in the Premier League. We have Europa League knockout football again. It's the complete same situation as about 2 years ago, where we had the chance to push in the January transfer window. We clearly needed players in because we were just running our players into the ground. They couldn't play and compete on both sides. And we dropped off in the Premier League form. We managed to just about get 7th in the end. But, when it comes to the Europa League, it probably cost us as well because we weren't fresh enough for those matches. Last year, we got away with it more because we were able to rotate against weaker opposition a little bit more. Not towards the latter stages, but we didn't really have the Premier League, fight on our hands as well. Other than relegation, we were kind of clear of by April. We could then play our Europa Conference League matches to full strength. So this season's completely different because most West Ham fans probably didn't expect us to be 6th in the Premier League this season. Myself, I really thought it'd be kind of a mid-table readjustment after the Declan Rice sale. We've got ourselves in a really, really solid position with 18 games left in the Premier League to push on and get Europa League football again next season, which would be massive for this football club. But we're not going to do that if we want to try and, also compete in Europa League as well as, continue in the Premier League. So for you, Mike, is this a case of don't let history repeat itself, go and sign those 2 or 3 players that we need for the squad and, really push on for the end towards the end of this end of this season?
Yeah, for me, this is a bit of a watershed moment. This is if the board want to be taken seriously, and they want to remove a lot of this back and forth animosity. I don't think that's ever going to go, but just to remove some level of, they're absolute, jokers that they're never interested. All they're looking at is counting the money, and West Ham, if they're successful, it's in spite of, not because of. If they want to start to remove some of those layers for some fans, they have to, in this window, attack it. They have to at least go get 3 players, and for me, those 3 players would be players that play either as a centre forward, as a left winger, or as a centre midfielder. I think those are key. Arguably, we need 4 because we're going to probably need another centre back.
100%.
So I think you can get away with a left winger without getting a left winger, as providing that the centre forward can play on that kind of, in that, like you say, that cross kind of field aspect. Centre midfield for me is absolutely pivotal because, again, we have nothing to rotate into that midfield.
Yeah.
And, defence, we've seen, again, everyone dropping like flies, and Kurt Zouma, where his mind was yesterday for that equaliser is... It's probably
happened a few times this season, though. It's not even once.
I think it's the 3rd time he's done it. And there was a particular game I remember we was talking about, and I was talking about just what Zouma. He's completely at fault in terms of where he is positionally. And you see that we're linked to Max Kilman. Kilman would be great. Very rarely gets injured. Would be fantastic to come into that defence because, again, it covers for Aged, who's been rather prone to injury. Obviously, Zouma, you can't trust him when it comes to fitness-wise. But again, Kilman's probably only likely if we sell Aged. I think then would use Danny Ings. And to talk that Danny Ings is staying, I think is slightly barbed. I think it's more just to kind of say West Ham fans and to set this expectation of he might have to stay. I don't think there's any intention for him to stay. I think we intend to get rid of him, and we will get rid of him.
Yeah.
However, it's just they're just hedging their bets in case we don't get a striker, and I think that's all it is. But
yeah,
we have to go out. You know, as you say, we're sixth in the league. We're having from the points point of view, one of the best seasons that we have ever had in the Premier League.
Yeah.
Regardless of opinions on playing style, results-wise, we're doing brilliantly, and we're still in Europa League. So to not try and attack it, to at least solidify our position as a minimum in 6th or 7th, would be absolutely ridiculous. And if we don't do that, then in the summer, what we then doing? We're then trying to then go and buy players without any European football to try and help us.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's going to have that knock-on effect of not only potentially keeping players, but also signing players again next summer.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think I completely agree with that. You know, Danny Ings, yes, he's set to stay, but again, it's probably circumstantial with who's going to be injured for how long and whether we can get a suited loan or buyer for him with how high his wages are. You know, £125,000 a week. Championship team isn't going to pay all of those wages. You might find someone in the Premier League desperate enough to pay maybe 70, 80% of that if they need a striker, if you look towards the bottom. But again, it's not going to be a long-term fix. So we need to bring in a striker that's going to solidify that position for us for the next 3, 4, 5 years and is a long-term project for David Moyes and West Ham.
And even if it's a long-term project player that maybe we don't expect to come in as a start, because we're going to keep that, you know, that rotational free that we've had when they're all back and
just
fully
need that
fit.
depth.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Getting Etikike, you know, is fine because that's probably a player that they're thinking maybe in the next 3 to 4 seasons, he will be the player to take over. In the summer, we'll then go big on the actual centre forward that we want. And you can accept that because Antonio will be back in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Bowen hopefully is going to be back by the time the next game comes around. I'm not talking about Bristol, I'm on about the Premier League.
Yeah.
Same with Paqueta, and you know, then Kudus will be back 2 weeks later. So when you look at it in that respect, you can kind of go, well, you can accept a cover centre forward or centre forward who's going to be competition in the near future, but something has to come in because it's unfair to rely on an 18-year-old kid and to throw him in the deep end and say, right, lads, you're just going to have to go and sink or swim. And by the way, we're not going to get close enough to you to give her any support and have the match experience to kind of work out how to work within those parameters.
Well, that's what it is, isn't it? We're not really in a position where we can place all that emphasis on someone like Mubama to go and score the goals and relieve the line and do all these things because it's just, A, it's not fair on him, and B, it's not the development that he'll need. You know, he needs to be guided.
Yeah, and people might say Brighton, or look what they did with Ferguson. It's like, but they play a different game, and they also have players that play incredibly close to the centre forward. If you look at the Bristol game, as much as the criticism Mubama got, he was very isolated, and you're asking a young lad to drop in and then to sprint on to try and he just looked a bit lost in that he didn't really seem to understand what his role was, and that's fair enough. He's 18, learning his trade.
Yeah,
he's going to have moments where it's maybe not going to quite compute, and he's not playing. So it's also, again, you don't have that rhythm. So I had a lot of sympathy for him, and I think a lot of what was said against him was unfair, and he had an opportunity at the end where if the goalkeeper didn't make a brilliant save, he's winning us the match in the final minutes, which was when Danny Ings obviously missed his absolute sitter. So it's a weird that game could have turned on its head for Mbama. He could have actually been praised with some criticism about what things he can improve, but it would have been praised for his poacher's instinct. So it's just weird how those things can change on a dime. And I do think that I'd rather keep Mbama around than Ings because, you know, I'm, I guess, old school in that West Ham mentality of you develop your own. I would prefer to see us actually take the time to develop our own players rather than having to rely on a loan deal. I think that's lazy. I don't think that's ingrained in West Ham's heritage and culture, or at least its old heritage and culture.
Yeah.
And I'd rather see Danny Ings shipped out because, again, the wages are just astronomical. He's not playing as well, although he did probably play all right, actually, when he came on, bar the miss. But it's a deal that's worked very badly for everyone, and I think it's probably the right time to cut those ties and to move on. However, we need another striker to come in, whether it's a starter or someone who can be back up to Bowen for the remainder of the season, but we need someone else to come in.
Well, hopefully we do that. Hopefully we bring in someone to play striker because, you know, we don't want to be making the same mistakes as 2 years ago, where we had a chance to push on both Premier League and Europa League fronts, and we probably fell short in the end because of that lack of rotation and lack of squad depth and quality in depth, not just the numbers. So, yeah, let us know what you think about the whole Danny Ings situation, the whole injury crisis situation that's somehow hit us once again after a kind of throwaway game against Bristol City. But yeah, hopefully they'll be back and firing very soon, and we'll continue our good form in the Premier League, and hopefully we'll have a couple more good signings to go along with it as well before the end of January. So yeah, make sure to leave a like on the video if you are new around here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well. Leave a comment down below. And Mike, until next time.
Come on, you Irons.